The crisp winter morning in Seattle brought with it a biting cold that seemed to seep through even the thickest of coats. The streets were quietly coming to life as the sun peeked through the tall buildings, casting long shadows on the frost-covered sidewalks. Officer James Mitchell pulled his police jacket tighter around himself as he stepped out of his patrol car for his regular morning walk through the downtown area. He'd been doing this route for nearly 7 years now, and he knew every shop owner, every regular morning jogger, and even the timing of when Mrs. Lee would open her small bakery, filling the air with the smell of fresh bread. But today was different. As he rounded the corner near the old bookstore, something caught his eye. A small figure huddled in a doorway, trying to find shelter from the morning chill. At first, Officer Mitchell thought it might be another homeless person seeking refuge, something all too common in the city. But as he got closer, his heart sank. There, curled up like a small bird trying to keep warm, was a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a thin jacket that seemed 2 sizes too big for him. But what really stopped Officer Mitchell in his tracks were the boy's feet. Bare and red from the cold, tucked underneath him in a desperate attempt to find warmth. The officer approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, crouching down to the boy's level. "Aren't you cold out here?" The boy looked up, and Officer Mitchell saw a face that was trying so hard to be brave despite the circumstances. His small hands were wrapped around his arms, and his lips had a slight blue tinge from the cold. "I'm okay, sir," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper, a small cloud forming with each word in the frosty air. "I'm just waiting for the library to open. They have heating inside." He tried to smile, but Officer Mitchell could see him shivering. "What's your name?" the officer asked, already shrugging off his jacket to wrap around the boy's shoulders. "Tommy Garcia," the boy answered, gratefully accepting the warm jacket. "Thank you, sir." As they sat there in the doorway, Tommy slowly began to open up. He lived with his mom just a few blocks away, staying with relatives after they'd lost their apartment. His mom worked 2 jobs, one at a diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. They had food, they had a roof over their heads, but new shoes. That was a luxury they couldn't afford right now. His old ones had become too small months ago, and rather than burden his mom with another expense, Tommy had been going without. "But I still go to school every day," Tommy added quickly, as if worried the officer might think less of him. "Mom says education is really important. I just try to walk fast when the ground is cold." Officer Mitchell felt something tug at his heart. A mixture of sadness and admiration for this young boy who showed such resilience in the face of hardship. Here was a child who wasn't complaining about not having the latest video game or fancy toys. Instead, he was quietly bearing the winter cold, barefoot, just so he could get to school and not worry his hardworking mother. The morning traffic was picking up now, and more people were starting to fill the sidewalks. As they rushed past, wrapped in their warm coats and sturdy shoes, few noticed the small scene unfolding in the doorway. A moment that would soon change not just 2 lives, but an entire community. Looking at Tommy's brave face, Officer Mitchell made a decision. This wasn't going to be just another morning patrol. This was going to be the start of something much bigger, though neither of them knew it yet. Officer Mitchell watched as Tommy tried to stand up, his feet still red and chapped from the cold ground. The boy wobbled slightly, and the officer quickly reached out to steady him. The sight of those bare feet against the frozen concrete made his decision even more urgent. "Hey, Tommy," he said gently, "how about we get you warmed up in my patrol car for a few minutes?" He could see the hesitation in the boy's eyes. After all, kids are taught to be careful around strangers, even those in uniform. "We can call your mom too. Let her know you're okay." Tommy nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. As they walked to the car, Officer Mitchell noticed how Tommy would hop quickly from one foot to the other, trying to minimize contact with the cold ground. It reminded him of his own childhood, playing hot lava on a playground. Except this wasn't a game. This was real life for a young boy who should be worrying about homework and playing with friends, not about whether his feet would stay warm enough to walk to school. Once inside the heated patrol car, Tommy's shoulders relaxed a bit. His small hands reached out toward the heating vents, and color slowly returned to his cheeks. "Your mom must be really special," Officer Mitchell said, turning up the heat. "Working 2 jobs to take care of you." Tommy's face lit up at the mention of his mother. "She's the best," he said proudly. "She always makes sure I have breakfast before school, even when she's really tired from work. And she helps me with my math homework on her break." He paused, looking down at his feet. "I didn't tell her about my shoes getting too small. She works so hard already." As Tommy spoke, Officer Mitchell learned more about their life. They'd lived in a small apartment until 3 months ago, when the rent went up more than they could afford. Now they were staying with his aunt, sharing a small room. His mom worked at Sunrise Diner during the day and cleaned offices at night. Despite their struggles, Tommy hadn't missed a single day of school. "The teachers are really nice," Tommy explained, his voice getting stronger as he warmed up. "Ms. Chen sometimes shares her lunch with me when I forget mine. But I don't forget very often," he added quickly, not wanting to seem needy. "Mom always tries to pack me something, even if it's just a sandwich." Officer Mitchell listened, amazed by the strength of this family. Here was a boy who understood more about responsibility and gratitude than many adults he knew. Tommy wasn't asking for pity. He was simply doing his best with what he had, just like his mother. "You know what, Tommy?" Officer Mitchell said, making a decision. "I need to take my break anyway. How about we solve this shoe problem together?" He watched as hope and uncertainty battled across Tommy's face. But I can't pay you back," Tommy whispered, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his worn jacket. "Sometimes in life," Officer Mitchell replied, starting the car, "we don't pay back. We pay forward. Your mom works hard to take care of you, and you work hard at school. Let me help take care of both of you for a moment." As they pulled away from the curb, Officer Mitchell radioed dispatch to let them know he was taking his break. Through the rearview mirror, he could see Tommy looking out the window, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. The boy who had been trying so hard to be invisible, to not be a burden, was finally letting someone help. The morning traffic moved around them as they drove, people rushing to their jobs, focused on their own lives. None of them knew that in this police car, a simple act of kindness was unfolding, one that would grow into something much bigger than a pair of shoes. The small bell above the door chimed as Officer Mitchell and Tommy walked into Joe's Family Footwear, a family-owned shoe store that had been serving the community for over 30 years. The warm air inside wrapped around them like a blanket, and the smell of new leather filled their noses. Tommy stood close to Officer Mitchell, his eyes wide as he looked at all the shoes lining the walls. "Welcome, Toe." "Oh." The store owner, Mr. Joe, adjusted his glasses as he noticed Officer Mitchell's uniform. "Everything okay, officer?" "More than okay, Mr. Joe. My young friend Tommy here needs a good pair of winter boots." Officer Mitchell placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "And maybe a few pairs of warm socks, too." Tommy was trying his best not to stare at all the shoes, but his eyes kept drifting to a pair of sturdy blue and black boots on display. They weren't flashy or expensive looking, just practical and warm. Exactly what a young boy who walked to school every day would need. Mr. Joe, who had been selling shoes for longer than Tommy had been alive, knew exactly what to do. He pulled up a small stool and patted it with a friendly smile. "Have a seat, young man. Let's measure those feet of yours and find you something perfect." As Tommy sat down, Mr. Joe carefully measured his feet, talking the whole time about his own childhood. "You know, when I was about your age, my family didn't have much money either. But my teacher noticed I needed new shoes, and she helped out. Sometimes life works that way. People help people, and the world gets a little bit better. Officer Mitchell watched as Tommy slowly began to relax, even cracking a small smile when Mr. Joe told a silly joke about why shoes are always sold in pairs. Because if they sold them one at a time, we'd all be hopping mad. The old joke made Tommy giggle, probably for the first time that morning. "Size 4, Mr. Joe announced, standing up. "And I know just what you need." He disappeared into the back room and returned with several boxes. The first pair he brought out were the blue and black boots Tommy had been eyeing earlier. Tommy's face lit up as he tried them on. They fit perfectly, and when he stood up to walk around the store, his steps were sure and steady. No more tiptoeing across cold ground or trying to avoid icy patches on the sidewalk. "How did they feel?" Officer Mitchell asked, though he could already tell from Tommy's expression that these were the ones. They're perfect," Tommy whispered, looking down at his feet in amazement. He took a few more steps, then looked up with worried eyes. "But they must be really expensive." Mr. Joe, who had been watching the whole scene unfold, made a quick decision. "You know what? These boots are actually on our special sale today." He winked at Officer Mitchell. "And they come with 3 pairs of warm winter socks, free of charge." Officer Mitchell understood what Mr. Joe was doing, not just selling shoes, but being part of something bigger. As he paid for the boots and socks, Mr. Joe quietly added a waterproofing spray to the bag, on the house. Tommy couldn't stop looking at his new boots as they walked back to the patrol car. He kept wiggling his toes, now warm in thick socks and sturdy shoes. "Officer Mitchell," he said quietly as they got back in the car. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything else, Tommy," Officer Mitchell replied, starting the car. "But you know what you can do. Someday, when you see someone else who needs help, remember today. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything." As they drove toward Tommy's school, the morning sun was fully up now, making the frost sparkle on the trees. Neither of them knew it yet, but this morning was about to spark a chain of events that would warm more hearts than just Tommy's. The drive to school was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the car's heater. Tommy sat in the back seat, still admiring his new boots, occasionally reaching down to touch them, as if making sure they were real. Officer Mitchell caught these little moments in his rearview mirror, each one tugging at his heart. "My mom's not going to believe this," Tommy said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "She always tells me there are good people in the world. But," he trailed off, his eyes getting a bit watery. "Your mom sounds very wise," Officer Mitchell replied, carefully turning onto the street where Tommy's school stood. The morning rush of students was just beginning, with kids bundled up in winter coats streaming toward the entrance. "And you know what? She's absolutely right about good people, including you, Tommy." "Me?" Tommy looked surprised. "Yes, you. Instead of complaining about not having shoes, you kept going to school. You didn't want to worry your mom when she was already working so hard. That shows real character." As they pulled up to the school, Officer Mitchell noticed a small group of teachers gathered near the entrance. One of them, a kind-faced woman wearing a bright red scarf, immediately started walking toward the patrol car, concern evident on her face. "That's Ms. Chen," Tommy explained quickly. "She's my teacher." Ms. Chen reached the car just as they were getting out. "Tommy, we were worried when you weren't at your usual time." Her voice trailed off as she noticed his new boots. Tommy's whole face lit up as he showed them to her. "Look, Ms. Chen, Officer Mitchell got them for me. And they're warm, and they fit perfect, and they even came with socks." The words tumbled out in excitement, all his usual shyness forgotten for a moment. Ms. Chen's eyes met Officer Mitchell's, and without words, an entire conversation of gratitude passed between them. She had known about Tommy's situation, but hadn't been able to find a solution yet. "Well," she said, her voice slightly shaky, "this calls for a special hot chocolate from my secret stash. Would you like to join us, Officer Mitchell. Inside Ms. Chen's classroom, as Tommy proudly showed his new boots to a few early arriving classmates, Officer Mitchell quietly shared the morning's events with the teacher. "I had no idea it was this bad," he admitted. A boy his age, walking barefoot in winter. Ms. Chen nodded, preparing 3 hot chocolates from a small electric kettle in the corner. Tommy never complains. He helps other students with their math, shares his lunch when someone forgets theirs, even though he sometimes barely has enough himself. She paused, watching Tommy demonstrate how his new boots could handle any puddle. His mother works so hard, but with the rent increases in this area. Officer Mitchell watched as Tommy interacted with his classmates. The boy who had been huddled in a doorway just an hour ago was now standing tall, explaining to his friends how a police officer had helped him. There was no shame in his voice, just pure gratitude and joy. As the first bell rang, signaling the start of classes, Officer Mitchell prepared to leave. Tommy ran over to give him one last thank you, this time wrapping his arms around the officer in a quick, surprise hug. "I'm going to be a police officer too when I grow up," he whispered, "so I can help people like you helped me." Walking back to his patrol car, Officer Mitchell felt something shift inside him. This wasn't going to be the end of the story. It couldn't be. A pair of boots had changed this morning, but Tommy's family still faced challenges. As he started his car, an idea began forming in his mind. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could grow into something much bigger, and Officer Mitchell had a feeling this was just the beginning. After leaving Tommy's school, Officer Mitchell couldn't focus on his regular patrol duties. His mind kept going back to the boy's situation. A hardworking single mother, recent eviction, and who knows what other struggles they were facing. During his lunch break, he made a decision that would change more lives than he could imagine. The Sunrise Diner wasn't hard to find. It was one of those classic small diners that had been serving the community for decades, with slightly faded letters on the window and the smell of fresh coffee wafting onto the street. As Officer Mitchell walked in, the little bell above the door announced his presence, making several customers look up from their meals. Behind the counter, a woman in a blue uniform was juggling multiple orders, her hair neatly tied back, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this job for years. Even though she looked tired, she wore a genuine smile as she served her customers. Officer Mitchell knew immediately this had to be Tommy's mom. They had the same determined look in their eyes. "Welcome to Sunrise Diner," she said warmly, approaching with a coffee pot in hand. Then she noticed his uniform, and a flash of worry crossed her face. "Is everything okay? Is Tommy all right?" "Everything's fine, Mrs. Garcia," Officer Mitchell assured her quickly. "Actually, I met Tommy this morning. I'm Officer Mitchell." He watched as recognition and relief washed over her face. "Please call me Anna," she said, her voice softening. "Tommy called me from school, telling me about the boots." Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Officer Mitchell replied honestly. "But I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes if you have time." Anna glanced at the clock, then called out to her coworker. "Hey Linda, can you cover for me for my break?" The older waitress nodded with a knowing smile, and Anna led Officer Mitchell to a quiet booth in the corner. As they sat down, Anna's professional waitress smile faded, replaced by the worried look of a mother trying her best to keep it all together. "I feel so ashamed," she admitted quietly. "A police officer having to buy shoes for my son. I work 2 jobs, but with the rent increases and the eviction costs." "There's nothing to be ashamed of," Officer Mitchell interrupted gently. "Tommy told me how hard you work. He's an amazing kid, polite, responsible, still going to school every day despite everything. That says a lot about how you've raised him." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "We were doing okay before the rent went up. I had even saved a little money for Christmas. But then the new property company bought our building, raised the rent by almost double, and she shrugged helplessly. My sister took us in, but her place is so small. I'm trying to save for a new apartment, but with the deposits they want nowadays. Officer Mitchell listened, his mind already working on possibilities. Through his years on the force, he'd made connections with various community organizations. He knew people who could help, legitimate organizations that assisted families going through tough times. Anna, he said carefully, I know some people who might be able to help. There's a housing assistance program that works with local landlords. And the community center has a great after-school program. Tommy could stay there until you finish your day shift, save you some worry. I couldn't accept. Anna started, but Officer Mitchell raised his hand gently. Think of it this way. You're already helping others every day. Every person who comes into this diner gets served with a smile, no matter how tired you are. Sometimes, it's okay to let others help you too. The diner's busy sounds continued around them. Plates clinking, coffee being poured, casual conversation flowing. But in their quiet corner, something important was happening. A mother was learning that it was okay to accept help, that struggling didn't mean failing, and that sometimes angels came in the form of police officers who noticed a barefoot boy on a cold morning. Word about what happened that morning spread through the community like a gentle wave. It started with a customer at the shoe store who had witnessed the whole scene. She'd have been so moved by Officer Mitchell's kindness that she shared the story on her social media, along with a photo she'd taken of Tommy trying on his new boots, his face beaming with joy. By that evening, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Local news stations began calling the police department, asking about the officer who had helped the barefoot boy. But it wasn't just about a heartwarming story anymore. People wanted to know how they could help. Look at this, Chief, Officer Mitchell said, showing his supervisor the flood of messages on his work email. People are asking how they can donate shoes, clothes, even offering housing leads for Tommy's family. The chief nodded, a warm smile crossing his usually serious face. Sometimes it takes one person to remind everyone what community really means, the chief replied, scrolling through the messages. And speaking of community, he turned his computer screen to show Officer Mitchell an email from the director of Hope House, a local nonprofit organization specializing in housing assistance. The director's message was simple but powerful. We've been following Tommy's story. We want to help. We have a program that works with responsible landlords who offer fair rents to working families. Several of our partner landlords have already reached out after seeing the story. Can we connect with Tommy's mother? Meanwhile, at Sunrise Diner, customers were leaving extra-large tips for Anna, often with notes saying, "For Tommy's mom," or from one parent to another. Regular customers who had never known about her struggles were now asking how they could help. One elderly couple who came in every morning for breakfast told her about an apartment opening up in their building. A decent place with a fair landlord who valued long-term tenants over maximum profit. The local elementary school wasn't left untouched by the wave of kindness either. When other parents learned about Tommy's situation, they started talking about ways to help other students who might be struggling silently. The PTA organized a Warm Feet, Warm Hearts drive, collecting new shoes and winter clothing for families in need. Mr. Joe, the shoe store owner, decided to establish a permanent program at his store. For every 10 pairs of shoes sold, he announced, putting up a sign in his window, "We'll donate 1 pair to a child in need." We're calling it Steps of Hope, because sometimes all it takes is one step to start a journey toward better things. But perhaps the most touching response came from Tommy's classmates. Without any adult prompting, they started a kindness club during lunch breaks. The idea was simple. They would look out for each other, share when they could, and make sure no one felt alone in their struggles. Tommy, who had once tried to hide his problems, was now helping other kids feel brave enough to ask for help when they needed it. Back at the police station, Officer Mitchell sat at his desk, reading through more messages from the community. A local business owner wanted to offer Anna a better-paying job with regular hours. A dental office was offering free checkups for families in similar situations. A real estate agent wanted to help find affordable housing options. It's amazing, isn't it? His partner said, stopping by his desk. How one simple act of kindness just keeps growing. Officer Mitchell smiled, thinking about the small boy he found huddled in a doorway just days ago. You know what's really amazing? He replied. All of this was already here. All this goodness, all these people wanting to help. Sometimes we just need a reminder to look around and see each other properly. As the day wound down, Officer Mitchell received one more message, this one from Anna. It was a photo of Tommy doing his homework at their kitchen table, still wearing his new boots even though he was indoors. The message read, "He says the boots help him think better. Thank you for showing him that miracles still happen. But mostly, thank you for showing him that he matters." That night, as Officer Mitchell drove home, the city seemed different somehow. Behind every window was a story. Behind every passing face was a struggle or a triumph. And maybe, just maybe, all it took to make a difference was the courage to stop and help one barefoot boy on a cold morning. 6 months had passed since that cold winter morning, and the changes in the community were remarkable. The small act of kindness that started with a pair of boots had grown into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. The police department's new patrol of the Heart program was Officer Mitchell's idea, but his fellow officers embraced it immediately. Every patrol car now carried a small supply of emergency items: warm socks, gloves, granola bars, and even a few pairs of children's shoes in various sizes. The program had already helped dozens of families in need. You know what's funny? Officer Mitchell told his partner one morning as they loaded fresh supplies into their trunk. We've always had the tools to give tickets and make arrests, but now we have tools to make somebody's day better too. His partner nodded, remembering how just last week they'd helped a young mother whose car had broken down in the rain, her 3 kids shivering in the backseat. The Steps of Hope program at Mr. Joe's shoe store had taken off beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a simple donation program had evolved into a community movement. Local businesses started matching his efforts. The coffee shop offered free hot drinks to families coming in for donated shoes, and the bookstore next door added free school supplies to each pair given away. But perhaps the most heartwarming change was happening at Tommy's school. The Kindness Club that started in his class had spread to other grades. Students were looking out for each other in ways the teachers had never seen before. If someone's lunch money ran out, others would quietly share. When a new student arrived mid-semester without a winter coat, 3 different families offered help before the teachers even noticed the need. One day, during lunch break, Tommy sat with his friends under their favorite tree in the schoolyard. He was wearing his beloved boots, now showing signs of good use but still sturdy and warm. A younger student walked by, looking lost and a bit sad. "Hey," Tommy called out gently. "Want to sit with us?" The younger boy hesitated, then nodded shyly. As he joined their circle, Tommy noticed the boy's worn-out shoes, held together with tape. Without drawing attention to it, he caught Ms. Chen's eye across the playground and gave a small signal, their secret code for when someone needed help. That afternoon, Ms. Chen made a quick call to Mr. Joe's store. By the next morning, another child had new shoes, and the cycle of kindness continued. At the Sunrise Diner, things had changed for Anna too. The owner had promoted her to assistant manager, with better pay and more regular hours. She still worked hard, but now she could be home in the evenings to help Tommy with his homework. Their new apartment, while small, was clean and warm, with a kitchen window that caught the morning sun. The local news did a follow-up story about how one officer's kindness had sparked a community-wide movement. They interviewed Officer Mitchell, who seemed embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," he insisted. The real story is about this community, how everyone came together to help not just one family, but to create lasting change. The reporter asked what he'd learned from all this. Officer Mitchell thought for a moment, then smiled. You know, we often think change has to be big to matter. But sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest things, like noticing a barefoot boy on a cold morning. That evening, as families across the city watched the news story, many were inspired to start their own acts of kindness. A teenager offered to shovel snow for his elderly neighbor. A busy businessman stopped to help a lost child find their parent at the mall. A teacher started keeping extra sandwiches in her desk for students who might be hungry. And somewhere in the city, Tommy sat at his kitchen table, doing his homework while his mom prepared dinner. His boots stood by the door, ready for tomorrow's adventures. On the wall hung a framed photo, a boy with new boots and a police officer with a kind smile. A reminder that sometimes the greatest changes in life start with a simple act of noticing someone in need. As winter turned to spring and spring blossomed into summer, Tommy's life had changed in ways he never imagined possible. His mother's new position at the diner meant she no longer needed her second job. Instead of coming home to an empty apartment, he now walked into a home filled with the smell of home-cooked meals and the sound of his mom's cheerful humming. One sunny afternoon, Tommy stood in front of his class, his voice clear and confident as he shared his latest achievement. For my community project, he announced, I started collecting gently used shoes from our neighbors. He gestured to the colorful display of cleaned and sorted shoes behind him. My mom helped me put up flyers, and Officer Mitchell showed me how to organize everything. The class listened intently as Tommy explained how he collected over 50 pairs of shoes in just 2 weeks. His teacher beamed with pride. This was the same boy who, months ago, had tried so hard to hide his own struggles. Now he was standing tall, helping others without hesitation. The best part, Tommy continued, his eyes bright with excitement, is that Mr. Joe from the shoe store taught me how to check if the shoes are still good enough to give away. He even showed me how to clean them properly. His classmates clapped, and several raised their hands, eager to help with his project. After school, Tommy and his friends sorted through the donated shoes in the community center. They had a system: sneakers in one pile, winter boots in another, dress shoes in a third. Each pair was carefully cleaned and matched with fresh laces donated by Mr. Joe's store. You know what's cool? Tommy said to his friend while polishing a pair of children's sneakers. These shoes might help another kid feel better, just like my boots helped me. His friend nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The community center had become a second home for Tommy and many other kids. Instead of being alone after school while their parents worked, they had a safe place to do homework, play games, and even learn new skills. The center's director had started a homework club, where older students helped younger ones with their studies. One day, while Tommy was helping sort donations at the center, a small girl came in with her mother. The girl's shoes were falling apart, held together with tape, just like Tommy's had been before Officer Mitchell helped him. Without hesitation, Tommy knew exactly what to do. I think I have the perfect pair for you, he said kindly, remembering how it felt to be in her shoes, literally. He found a pair of purple sneakers that he'd cleaned just that morning, perfect for her size. The girl's face lit up when she tried them on, and Tommy felt a warmth in his heart that he'd never known before. That evening, as Tommy walked home with his mom, he noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. He saw the way the crossing guards stayed late to make sure every child got home safely. He noticed how the librarian kept the library open an extra 15 minutes so kids could finish their homework. He saw the bakery owner giving away day-old bread to anyone who needed it. Mom, he said suddenly, stopping on the sidewalk, I think I know what I want to be when I grow up. Anna looked at her son, seeing how much he'd grown, not just in height, but in heart. What's that, honey? I want to be like Officer Mitchell, someone who notices when people need help, and then actually helps them. He paused, then added, "But maybe I'll be a teacher too, like Miss Chen. Or maybe I can do both." Anna hugged her son close, remembering the worried little boy who had once hidden his bare feet beneath his desk. That boy was still there, but he'd grown into something more. A helper, a leader, someone who understood that receiving help didn't make you weak. It made you strong enough to help others. As they walked home, the setting sun painted the sky in beautiful colors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Tommy knew now that he wasn't facing them alone. His community had shown him that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness, and he was ready to keep that chain of kindness going, one pair of shoes at a time. 1 year had passed since that cold winter morning when Officer Mitchell found a barefoot boy in a doorway. Now, on a bright spring afternoon, the school auditorium was packed with proud parents, teachers, and community members for the annual Community Service Awards ceremony. Tommy sat in the front row, wearing his best clothes and, of course, his treasured boots, though they were now a bit scuffed from a year of adventures and good deeds. His mom sat beside him, no longer looking tired and worried, but glowing with pride. Officer Mitchell had taken the afternoon off to be there too, sitting with them in his dress uniform. And now, the principal announced, her voice warm with emotion, "We have a very special award to present. This year's Young Community Leader Award goes to a student who turned his own experience with hardship into a mission to help others." Tommy's eyes widened as the principal began describing his shoe collection project, which had now provided footwear to over 300 children in need. But it wasn't just about the shoes anymore. His initiative had sparked a whole movement of student-led community service projects throughout the school district. Tommy Garcia, the principal continued, has shown us that age doesn't matter when it comes to making a difference. His Steps Forward program has inspired students across our city to look for ways to help others. As Tommy walked up to receive his award, he saw familiar faces in the crowd. There was Mr. Joe from the shoe store, beaming like a proud grandfather. Ms. Chen was wiping happy tears from her eyes. The community center director was recording everything on her phone to share with the afternoon program's kids. I didn't do this alone," Tommy said when he reached the microphone, his voice slightly shaky but growing stronger with each word. "A year ago, I was the one who needed help. I was trying to hide that I had no shoes, thinking I had to solve everything by myself." He looked at Officer Mitchell, who gave him an encouraging nod. "But then someone noticed me. Really noticed me. And that changed everything. Not just because I got new boots, but because it showed me that it's okay to accept help, and then pass it on to others." Tommy went on to explain how his classmates had joined his mission, how the Kindness Club had spread to other schools, and how even the youngest students were finding ways to help their community. "Sometimes people think kids can't make a difference," he said. "But we can. Sometimes all it takes is noticing someone who needs help, just like Officer Mitchell noticed me." After the ceremony, as people gathered for refreshments in the school cafeteria, a small boy approached Tommy. He was wearing a pair of sneakers that Tommy recognized. They had been part of last month's shoe drive. "Thank you," the boy said quietly. "I want to help people too, like you do. Can you teach me how?" Tommy smiled, remembering how it felt to be on the receiving end of kindness. "Of course. Want to join our next shoe drive? We're collecting rain boots for spring." Officer Mitchell watched this interaction from across the room, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 year. The barefoot boy he'd found that winter morning was now leading others, creating a chain reaction of kindness that showed no signs of stopping. Later that evening, as Tommy and his mom walked home with Officer Mitchell, they passed the doorway where their story had begun. Tommy stopped for a moment, looking at the spot where he'd once huddled in the cold. "You know what, Officer Mitchell?" he said thoughtfully. "That morning, you didn't just give me boots. You showed me that everyone has the power to help someone else. And that's even better than new shoes." As they continued walking, The setting sun cast long shadows behind them, 3 shadows that had become family through an act of kindness. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear, twinkling with the promise of more good things to come. And somewhere in the city, another child was being helped by someone who had been inspired by Tommy's story. Another link was being added to the chain of kindness that had started with a police officer noticing a barefoot boy on a cold winter morning, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes of all.